Okay, hey everybody, it's Russ recording this video from somewhere in southern Thailand where there aren't that many cases of COVID, actually. I'm turning off my phone. And it's relatively safe. We're going to talk about venture capital in this lecture. I'm going to refrain from talking a lot about the course, except to say a couple of things. One, if you are doing a product licensing project, you should have your sell sheet long done, and you should have already called almost all the companies on your lists for both your products. I have a bigger announcement to make, which I will do on CAT courses, but all the interaction we're going to do, almost all the interaction is going to be on Slack. So there are a number of you who, for whatever reason, can't follow directions and add your name and email to the Google Sheet in one of the prior announcements, so that I need that email to add you to Slack. Please do that. Put your name and email on that Google Sheet so I can invite you to Slack, and most of our asynchronous discussions will take place there. Let's see, what else? I will give you one COVID-19 tip, as I am on 40 hours of international flights in tightly cramped airplanes with hundreds of other people who no doubt some percentage of have COVID. So prevention, I am not a doctor. I do like to play one all the time though, since I do a bunch of health research. Coming from Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt in Washington himself, the suggestion is hydrochlorous acid, HOCl spray, and propolis spray. So the hydrochlorous acid you can spray in your eyes, nose, mouth, and throat. It will kill any kind of virus on contact. It's highly effective. Pretty much unless you inhale the virus and it goes straight into your lungs, it's going to have to settle in your throat and grow there in almost every instance, and then work its way down into your lungs. And so if you did happen to encounter someone who coughed, or you touched something with COVID-19 and then touched your mouth and it worked its way into your throat, the hypochlorous acid and the propolis spray will kill that on contact. So I'm using those all the while. I don't have any hypochlorous acid here. I'll have to wait till I get home, but I'm using propolis spray all the time, in addition to all the regular hygiene recommendations, to kill anything that might have made its way into my throat, especially on the plane flights. Okay, enough of stupid COVID. I'm tired of hearing and talking about COVID. We're going to talk about venture capital today. I don't think any of you are going to get to the point in this brief and very peculiar semester where you're going to be needing or engaging with venture capitalists, but it's still useful to know a few of the things. I'm going to move stuff around here so I can see my slides. Okay, and my advance button doesn't work, so I do that. Okay. So what the heck are venture capitalists? Well, VCs raise money typically from private and institutional investors. I don't know that many institutional investors, actually. A portion of pension and mutual funds, well, I guess that's true. A portion of pension and mutual funds put dollars in high-risk VC funds, but it's typically pretty small. Usually VC funds are made up of private money, people who are willing to kind of take bigger risks in exchange for bigger, maybe 1,000-fold, 5,000-fold returns. Those VCs then find companies in which to invest, and they know that most of those companies are going to fail, but they're looking for that 1 in 10, or 1 in 20 that really turn out to be those unicorns that make all the money for the fund. They close the funding deals, and they also help advise, mentor, and occasionally take over aggressively the companies that they funded, and they will facilitate the exit, both the initial public offering in the beginning and the actual exit, the sale on the other side at the end. So in short, they're a way to get some somewhat costly money to allow you to grow your business. Now, as I've repeated many times throughout the course, you probably don't need money. That is probably not the limiting factor. The limiting factor is probably finding a decent business model for your business, correctly identifying who your customers are, finding a product that people want. If you get to the point where things are growing like crazy and or you've got a major hurdle or a milestone that you can't make without money, and you can't get it through angel investors, and you can't bootstrap your way to that money, then you can consider venture capital funding. As I've also mentioned, it is not unheard of for a VC firm to structure the term sheet in such a way that they place the CEO that they want in there, that they control the board members and they wind up taking over the company and you are left out in the street. So you have to be very careful about that. Although things have kind of standardized with the term sheets that are being used these days. So I think it's gotten a little bit better on that front, but there are people that know more about this than me and are more up to date and can probably give me some feedback at some point on whether that's actually the case. So up on the screen, you see the org chart, the very simple org chart for a VC firm. There are a bunch of limited partners, investors. So these could be pension funds, high net worth individuals, family offices, endowments, foundations, sovereign wealth funds, corporate pension funds. Did I mention that? All sorts of people who are willing to invest in a high risk venture capital firm, right? So the VC firm is, so in a limited partnership, you've got a general partner and you've got limited partners. So the VC firm serves as the general partner, and then the investors serve as a long collection of limited partners. Together, they have ownership of the VC fund that the venture capital firm controls. The VC firm then decides through gazing in crystal balls and reading tea leaves and otherwise going on drug-fueled investigations of their psyche, who they think is going to be a decent investment. So I'm joking, but what I mean is that they're wrong most of the time. When they are right, it's because typically they've got lots of connections in the industry in Silicon Valley, and they've talked to lots of people, and there's enthusiasm that builds up around certain organizations that they typically follow, really. And the downside of that is things like Theranos, in case you've heard of that. So the enthusiasm can manifest around a firm, and that enthusiasm can be utterly unwarranted. And the VC firms don't have any special X-ray vision or special knowledge or ability to, prognosticate and figure out which businesses are going to be successful and which aren't. They're just kind of, winging it for the most part. And yes, I stand by that, even though we have, places like Sequoia Capital and other famous VC firms that seem to have a very good track record. I think that track record is due to the fact that they're just better plugged in, not because they have X-ray goggles. Okay, so in the firm hierarchy, you've got the general and the venture partners, you've got principals, you've got senior associates, you've got analysts, you've got admins. So typically a regular analyst in a VC firm will run around and they'll try to find a really good company that makes its way up the food chain and eventually gets investments from the VC firm itself. And that's how analysts do well and make a name for themselves and become successful. So here is a chart that represents something. We've got number of deals. Okay, so the y-axis is number of deals, starting back from like 1990 up through at least 2015. We see the huge bubble that happened around, 98 to 2000, and things came crashing down. People got terrified, and the venture capital basically really dried up for a while. And it only improved a little bit recently. And it's actually, if we could see a current chart, which I do not have, we'd see this going up quite a bit more through 2016, 17, 18, 19, to the point where a number of people are worried that there might be some kind of bubble that's going to burst and the venture capital will dry up. I'm a little bit out of touch on VC things the last couple of years, but this was a serious worry at least a couple of years ago. Okay, so how do VCs decide how valuable your venture is before you have any profit? And the answer is, without getting into a lot of kabuki theater and hand waving, basically they make it up, right? So when you file for something like a C Corp, you can show up at the Department of Corporations in Sacramento with a $100 bill in your hand, and you can hand it over to the person behind the counter, and you fill out a short sheet. It's only a couple pages long. And in that sheet, you basically just have to provide the name of your company, Russ's Super Awesome Deluxe, incredible company, and your address, and the names of the people who are going to occupy some key roles in that company, and the number of shares the company has. And you're like, what, Russ? You can just make up the number of shares? Yep, you just flat out make it up. You can say the company has 10 shares or 10 million or 10 trillion. It simply doesn't make a difference. Why does it not make a difference? Because at the time you incorporate your company, in most cases, your company simply is not valuable if it's not doing anything, if it doesn't have customers, if it's not making revenue, much less profit. So it really doesn't make, the shares are worthless. So you can just say, you've got 1 billion shares or 1 trillion shares. It doesn't make a difference. So what you do need to understand is the difference between pre-money valuation and post-money valuation. We're going to talk about that, I think, in a few more slides. I really wanted to talk about some examples like Facebook versus Apple. Let's see if those slides come up. I can't remember. Okay. So as far as you're concerned as a potential entrepreneur getting venture capital funding, you really need to understand what the VC financing process looks like and how to negotiate that. I think pretty much your best source for that is going to be Feld and Mendelssohn's Venture Deals by Wiley Press. So if you're really interested in that, it's a little bit of a slow read, but it's got all the basics you need to know, and it's pretty practical as well. When it comes down to it, though, there are really only a couple of critical pieces. So there's the economics, that is how the money flows, and there's the control, who controls what, who owns how many shares, and has what kind of powers. So how does ownership work with these imagined valuations and many investments over years from different venture capital firms? You've heard terms like Series A, Series B, Series C. Those refer to consecutive rounds of investments from venture capital firms, right? But those can be from different firms. They can also be from individuals and non-venture capital places. You're going to have changing founders potentially. They're going to be diverging. I don't know what diverging motivations are, but they're going to be diverging motivations from different people. So how does all of this work together such that a business can actually get funded? The first thing to keep in mind when you're engaging with the venture capital firms is that you should not simply offload the work to some attorney who's going to handle things for you. You really have to understand everything and make sure that if you don't, you ask a lot of questions, because you want to get the term sheet right. And if you don't, lots of bad stuff can happen. Um, as Brad Mendelsohn said, if you're the entrepreneur, make sure you direct and control the process. While having mentors is never required, we strongly encourage entrepreneurs to find them, work with them, and build long-term relationships with them. So famously, Mark Zuckerberg had Sean Parker of Napster fame as his mentor, who really, made Facebook possible. I'm not sure Facebook would have gone anywhere without Sean Parker's mentorship. um, and he understood the VC firms. He knew how to kind of pull their strings and manipulate them, as well as just basic stuff like term sheets and how the process works. Okay, so your goal is to, if you are looking to get venture capital money, after talking to them, to get a term sheet offer from the venture capitalists. I think I've said this before, but I'll say it again. No one cares about your BS financial projections, right? So this is not 1980 anymore. No one wants to see a 200-page business plan where you fabricate a bunch of 5-year numbers out of thin air. As Brad Mendelsohn say, Feld and Mendelsohn, I meant, while you can create complex financial models that determine that you need a specific amount of capital down to the penny, we know one thing with complete certainty: these models will be wrong. Right? Instead, focus on a length of time you want to fund your company and get to the next meaningful milestone. We haven't yet read a business plan in over 20 years. Okay, so no one reads business plans anymore. Why places are still teaching business plan classes and how to write a business plan, I really have no idea. You do not need to write a business plan anymore. People long ago realized, especially the venture capitalists, that they were just a complete waste of time. They took up everybody's time. They were complete fabrications. Even if the entrepreneurs had the best intentions, you simply, cannot predict that far in the future. Okay. What you do need to know is the amount of money you're looking for to get to your next significant milestone. What does it mean to talk about a significant milestone? Well, it might be something like, getting to 1 million users, because that's the point where you're going to have enough revenue to do X, Y, and Z. Or it might mean that you're waiting for 2 big clients like, I don't know, Boeing and Citigroup to sign on to your enterprise software. And if they do, then lots of things are going to happen. Or it may need, so there might, in the thinking about where your business is going, there are going to be various milestones. Some of them are going to be significant. And what the venture capitalists are going to want to look for is that you have an understanding of what money you need and exactly what that money is going to be put to use for. And typically, what it's going to be put to use for most significantly is getting to some important milestone. Okay. What that is going to change from business to business. So what do you need, right, to talk to the VCs? Well, you need to understand you need to be able to explain your business at different levels of granularity, really. So you need to be able to give a 1-sentence summary of your business. There's a kind of, the elevator pitch, right? But just a 1 sentence that sums up everything. Oh, Airbnb is the, whatever. Everybody is the Uber of their business these days. So I'm starting a new business. It's going to be, whatever, confectionery stuff. I'm selling some derivative of donuts, and it's going to be my confectionery business is going to be the Uber of baked goods. So anyway, I'm being facetious, right? But that's the line everybody uses, and that's how they typically 1-sentence summarize. They compare their business and business model to some very famous, hyper successful recent business that had an amazing IPO, and they refer to him as the version of that in some way. But you don't have to do that. I'm just saying that's one way of doing it that everybody seems to do. Whatever it is, you need to be able to explain your business in 1 sentence, in a few paragraphs, okay, in an executive summary that's like 2 pages, and in a 12-slide deck where you're going to talk for about 20 minutes. That is it. That is all you need. Okay. When you go to the VCs, you're going to give them your slide presentation, and it really is only going to be about 12 slides. And your presentation really is only going to be about 20 minutes, right? Okay. Now, what are you going to put in those slides? Well, you're going to talk about the problem you're solving, just like on your MOKers in the business model section at the beginning, where I've asked you to describe the problem that you're solving. You're going to talk about the rough size of the market for the solution. If it's some kind of social media software, it's basically the entire planet. If it's like some new add-on to a particular kind of fishing lures that only work for carp in southeastern Baja of Mexico, it's going to be a much smaller demographic. But whatever it is, the rough size of your market. The quality of your team. So this is really important. If Elon Musk starts a new business, he is going to have people throwing money at him. And he's going to have people throwing money at him because they know that he puts together an amazing team, and he himself has an amazing track record of making stuff happen, right? So if people don't know you, you don't have a track record, they're uncertain about the viability of the business that you're putting together, they're going to look for a high quality team. Oh, we've got so-and-so who is the head of Apple's autonomous car division at Apple. Oh, we've got so-and-so who is the chief engineer at Google for 10 years. Oh, we've got so-and-so who is the chief, semiconductor architect at Intel, whatever. If you can get a very high quality team, it will garner much more attention and consideration, right? Part of what really helped Facebook was having Sean Parker. Sean Parker had pre-existing relationships with a lot of these VC firms and was very successful and, well known. So what is your competitive advantage and your competition? Okay, so they want to know what it is about your solution, your product, that is going to make it better than your competitors and who those competitors are, right? And typically folks like, what's his name, Peter Thiel, like to talk about a 10x improvement, right? So if you're offering something that is 10 times cheaper, that performs the same or better function, you have a viable product, right? And that will provide a significant competitive advantage. You do need, even though we're not writing a giant business plan, an understanding of your plan and what your status is relative to your plan, at least in broad terms. And you need to know what the significant milestones are, what the significant kind of breakpoints, the things that you're going to achieve at each stage in the foreseeable future of your business. But make no mistake, the VCs realize, this chair is one where I keep slouching. The VCs realize that plans change, that you may need to pivot completely. You may need to throw away your business model. They're not unaware of this, and it is not a problem, but what makes them feel better about that than they otherwise would is if you have, among other things, a competent team that can adroitly handle a giant change in the fundamental structure of your business, right? And is not going to implode when the basic business model changes, but adapt quickly. Okay, and of course, finally, they want to know how the funds are going to be used. Typically you're going to be hiring more employees, but what else are you going to be doing with the money? Are you going to be investing in certain resources, which are going to give you a competitive advantage? Or are you going to be maybe buying a key competitor? Or, what are you going to be doing with that money? So that's 7 things, right? And you've only got 12 slides. So really, you don't have a lot of space to talk about this. And that is the point. They don't want you rambling on for hours. They want you to concisely explain what you're doing in a persuasive manner. And you might do a fantastic job and they'll still kick you out the door. That's just the way it is, right? So famously, Airbnb went around and people were like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. No one's going to let some weird strangers into your place, and people aren't going to want to stay in some weird stranger's house. That's scary and dangerous and dumb. They were profoundly wrong. Airbnb is bigger than all the other hotel chains put together at this point. So just because you have a great idea doesn't mean they're going to realize it's a great idea. It's going to take time and effort to persuade people that you have a great idea. Okay, some more quotes. The only thing that we know about financial predictions of startup is that 100% of them are wrong, right? So they're not dumb. They realize that these financial projections are typically going to be overly optimistic, but to the degree that you can back them up, it is going to make them more swallowable, right? They're going to be able to believe those more readily than if you're not backing them up at all. Now, you read the beginning of the Mocher book, where the author talked about a conversation he had with, I think it was either Larry or Sergey, the Google founders, and he asked one of them what the market size was going to be, and he was given a number that was, 1,000-fold higher than he thought was reasonable, and it turned out they were right, but it was hard to believe. Another quote: "Never forget the simple notion that if you want money, ask for advice." The converse is also true. If you want advice, ask for money. Um, so that's a famous saying, right? But it means if you're in this context, if you're talking to the VCs, don't walk in the door and say, "Hey, can I have 100 million?" Say, "Hey, I realize you guys have a lot of expertise in this area and that area, which is what my business is operating in. I'd like to ask you a few questions. I'd like to get your advice on a few things, blah, blah, blah." Now, if they engage in that discussion with you and things start to seem interesting, then they will probably offer you money. Now, whether or not you should take that money is a completely separate question. But that age-old edict, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money, is pretty true in my opinion. This is true in any case. If you ever have any kind of failure of any sort, you want to find out why, right? Even if the reason is completely wrong, the fact that someone perceived that as a viable reason for turning you down is something you need to know so you can reframe how you present yourself so it doesn't happen again, right? This holds true with those of you who are doing product licensing deals, right? If you get turned down by a company, do not, just stop responding. Say, "Hey, thanks for considering my product. I'm curious as to why we didn't seem like a good fit for your company and you weren't interested in licensing it." You will learn a ton, and that information will be absolutely critical. So it is imperative that you find out why you got turned down, and not just in this case with VCs, but in anything you do in life. That's important where you're dealing with other people, right? Which is almost everything we do. Okay, if you get turned down from a job, if you get turned down from VCs, if your product license company gets turned down by the company, if you get turned down on a date, try to find out why. Okay, if you do get to the point where you get a second meeting with a VC that shows interest, always ask what their process is going forward, right? You've got a lot to learn about this. Even if you do things like go through the Feld and Mendelsohn book and you watch a lot of videos and you talk to other entrepreneurs, you're still going to be learning stuff, right? That's one thing that folks like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk were incredibly impressive with, is immediately asking a ton of questions of people they trusted until they understood things really, really well. One little important kind of hack or trick is that you never want to answer questions about which other venture capital firms you're talking to. There are a number of reasons for this. One is it's very easy for them to start talking to each other and then effectively, even if they're not trying to, basically conspire against you or to come to a consensus about problems that there are and things like that. It's also just bad form. It's not going to help if you say, "Hey, these guys are considering offering me 200 million. You guys are only talking about 100 million." So don't talk about the other venture capital firms that you're talking to. When you get down to the point where you have to sign or not sign a term sheet, then you just make a decision about which way to go rather than trying to force negotiations against each other. Now, this is completely different compared to most other things in life. If you are applying for a job, it actually helps in almost all cases to say, well, hey, Google and Intel just offered me a job for 20% more than you're offering, so it's going to be hard for me to take your offer. That will be highly motivating for that company you're talking to increase their offer by at least 20%. Right? If you're applying for a faculty position and you've got 4 other offers, you're seen as a much more desirable candidate, and they will do things like increase your salary and perks and things like that. So I did have a entrepreneur friend who, I may have told this story, I can't remember, called. He had a bunch of money. He was also very frugal, and so he was buying like a Honda Civic or a Honda Accord or something. He lived in Berkeley, I think, and instead of going to the individual auto dealers, what he did was go to one auto dealer, I think in Oakland, and then he sat down with the sales manager, and then he pulled out his mobile phone and he dialed up 2 other Honda dealers in the area, one in like Berkeley and one in San Francisco. And he put them all on the phone and he said, hey, I'm going to buy a Honda Accord right now. Who's going to give me the best price? It was a seriously ballsy thing to do. But it worked, amazingly, because they started fighting against each other. And eventually, like the Berkeley dealership apparently had some kind of, they have to make quotas every month, and they didn't really care how much money they made. I think they actually lost money on that particular car, but they needed to get a car sold to make quota or something like that. Anyway, they offered him a deal that was like, $7,000 cheaper than anybody else was offering. So in most cases, being open and transparent about the negotiation process and the other parties involved will help you. That is not the case here with venture capital firms. Okay, so I mentioned pre-money versus post-money before. I did not talk about it. So it's very simple. So there's a valuation to your company before the venture capital firm adds in the money. And then after they add in that money, you've got a post-money valuation, right? So we can imagine a company that's valued at $8 million. The VCs throw in $2 million, and now you have a post-money valuation of $10 million. So that's pretty simple. Now, typically you're going to want to retain some kind of employee option pool. So these are shares of stock that need to be reserved for future employees, but that stock has a dollar value that is not owned by the company itself. So it comes out of the value of the company, right? So if you now have a post-money valuation of say 10 million, right? And you're going to set up an option pool of about 20%. That means your post-money valuation is down to about 8 million. Right? So generally the option pool is about 10 to 20%. I'm going to flip through and see if I talk about, whoops, that didn't work. I wanted to talk about valuation a little bit. Well, I'll just mostly repeat what I said before, which is that valuation is a dark art. And there often isn't much rhyme or reason to it. There are plenty of companies that have high valuations that haven't yet made any revenue. I don't know if Twitter is making revenue yet. It certainly wasn't for the longest time. Amazon wasn't making, profit for the longest time. Amazon wasn't making profit for the longest time. But there is a belief with companies that have a huge amount of revenue and a huge number of customers that they can eventually convert all that effort and all those sales into something that at some point will be profitable. So we'll leave it there. I think I'll do a separate talk on valuation a little bit later, because it's the important thing to take away is that there's not a fixed algorithm that is going to ultimately determine valuation in all cases. If there was, there wouldn't be a stock market where people could speculate on stock going up and down. Okay, so everything comes down to the term sheet, right? And this is going to be the legal document that details the financing offer from a VC firm. It's only going to be about 8 pages. They used to be a lot shorter. They used to be like 2, and then they went up to 4 and 6. Now they're about 8. Maybe they're 10 pages these days. I don't know. Which is, relatively short for a legal document, but it includes all the legal components that describe the exchange of money for the equity in the company, because that's basically all that's going on. The VC firm is providing funds, and in exchange for those funds, they're getting equity. Now, is equity going to be worth much? Nah, not typically in the beginning, not too much, but they are investing in you on the hope that the shares are going to be worth a lot more in the future. And then they're going to be able to cash out and make tons of money. And the core component of the term sheet is typically going to be the cap table, the capitalization table. The cap table is just a summary of who owns how much of the company before and after financing. Okay, so here's what a Series A round, it could be a Series B or whatever, cap table looks like. You've got the individual founders itemized out. You've got some seed investors who maybe provided some money before the venture capital firm showed up. You've got a stock option plan for the employees. You've got things like convertible note holders, which I won't describe. And then you've got the Series A investors, right? The VC firm, right? So in this case, we've got a pre-money valuation of about $5 million, and then a post-money valuation of $7.5 million. Let me try to just focus on this a little bit more clearly so you can at least understand a couple of things. So all these letters I've got in this spreadsheet are areas where you can work to solve for that particular number. I'm not going to do that, but I'll run through the basics quickly. So if we're trying to figure out the percentage of the shares that are owned by the founders, well, we start with 100%. We've determined, that is the venture investors have determined, along with discussions with you, that they're going to get 33 1/3% of the shares. You've got to reserve 20% for the employee pool. Well, 100% minus 33 plus 20 is 53.33, winds up with 46.67%. So the founders' shares equal 46.67% of the total. That means that we can now run these numbers and figure out that the total number of shares is 4.2 million. The VC company is going to get about 1.4 million shares, and the employee pool is going to be reserved at 857 shares. When we have all that, we can calculate the value per share, which works out to $350 a share, assuming that the venture capital firm invests $5 million, and then there's a total valuation of post-money valuation of $15 million. So I realize that's fast, but this stuff is pretty easy when you dig into it and start going through the numbers slowly. I did not go through the numbers slowly, but if you wind up in a discussion with some venture capitalists at some point, feel free to ping me, and I can put you in touch with some mentors and talk to you myself. One of my former students, his parents are venture capitalists. I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you as well. Okay, so by way of wrapping up, let me remind you to please, I'm not sure why it's so hard, please add your name and email to the Google Sheet that is referenced in a couple of the last announcements, so that I can add you to Slack and we can continue most of our asynchronous conversations there. All right, I hope you guys are enjoying spring break and staying safe, and I will talk to you soon.